one of my friends is about to join the dating pool again, so I wanted to get and see this next company called Siren, or this next product, which is a new way to date. You know, we already have Tinder, we already have Match.com, we have lots of ways to meet people, but Siren is bringing us a new way, and we want to see it. So who are you?
My name is Susie Lee, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Siren, a social discovery app, and I'm from Seattle.
Yeah.
My background is kind of varied, and perhaps one could say I have some commitment issues, but I think I'm more of a wanderer and just like to be really curious about different things. So my original degree is in molecular biophysics and biochemistry.
Wow.
Then I got my master's in science education and taught in urban public education for a couple years. Those two, we can actually have a completely different conversation about how those worlds need to be disrupted. But then I decided to become an artist and dove into the world of like clay and ceramics. And if you've ever worked with clay, it's a really great medium for knowing how to change the world, because literally your hands are touching earth and making it change by your will. So I loved doing that, and I've been doing that for 10 years. Migrated over to digital media and started doing a lot of artwork in that way, and then launched Siren as kind of a vector for how you can meet people meaningfully online, which is actually what a lot of my artwork is about.
Very cool. So I love meeting entrepreneurs who are, well, most entrepreneurs are crazy because they're trying to take on already an entrenched industry, and dating is certainly, or meeting people, if you call it social discovery, is already a fairly entrenched industry with, you know, everything from Match.com to Cupid to Tinder. So I think most people who are looking to date have a concept of what those things are, and if not, Luke and I did a previous video where we sort of laid out all the current apps.
Right.
How do you fit in there, and what's different about Siren?
About Siren?
Yeah.
So I think to talk about the idea of what's an entrenched kind of business is dating, and it's been 15 years of crazy, basically. Yeah. And when you talk about is it a way to meet people, it's actually a really hard way to meet people. So looking at all the different models, I actually noticed that most of them, in fact, I would say all of them are of two camps, right? One is now the hot or not kind of swipe model, which is the Tinder model. And then the other is this overshared model, which is like the Match.coms and the eHarmonies. And that's really it. So for all the different iterations.
Overshare meaning I have to fill out a whole like resume almost about myself. And
and like the worst business meetings, aren't those the ones where you have like a job interview where you're sitting there and you're like, I'm being vetted right now in this really weird way, I'm being judged. And so I feel like that kind of oversharing sets up the kind of dynamic where you're sitting around going, are you really employed at this? And do you really like this kind of music? And I noticed that you also saw this movie, but did you? And so you're just suddenly like, I know too much about you without actually knowing if I can have a fun conversation with you.
Yeah.
So when I saw these, I also thought, this is also a really weird space for a woman to be in. And so when I put myself in the idea of what I would want to expose as a woman, it was actually a little bit odd. And the dirty secret, Robert, is that I've actually never done online dating. And it's not because I thought that this is actually a bad way to meet people. Yeah. Because you know this with your social media understanding, is that there's a beauty in the digital space because it collapses geography, it collapses time, it collapses class boundaries. There's a lot of things about it that are super positive. But when I saw the models, I thought, I would never want to use these.
Yeah.
So,
well, what I do is sort of dating. It's not, the goals are a little different. I'm married, so I don't have that. But you got in this chair because a friend of mine in Seattle said, I need to meet you because you're really interesting.
Right.
And that's sort of how a lot of dating happens, right? My friend who's getting back in the dating pool, that's what we did last night. We're like, oh, who should we introduce you to? You know? and are you ready for her?
Right.
You know?
But remember how you probably didn't tell too much, right? Like the introduction was, she's really an amazing human being.
Yeah.
And then that was it. So now you have to figure out in what ways am I amazing and what ways maybe am I less amazing.
Yeah.
So I think that was one of the things, as we said, there's a sweet spot for how you can meet a stranger and make that person seem a little more intriguing. Yeah. Because until then, everyone is the same, right? You're a little bit suspicious, you're not sure whether or not this is going to be worth your time, and you're also a little vulnerable because you know you have to share something.
Yeah.
So
your community asks questions, and maybe we can see what your app looks like.
Yep.
Who asks the questions? Is it other men, other women? Is it a third party? Who gets these people talking?
Right. So
how does it work, I guess, is a better question to start with, and then we'll...
Yeah, like the premise, Robert, is that we want to have this idea that it's an amazing cocktail party. And so a cocktail party or a really great dinner has an amazingly gracious host.
Yeah, Linda Stone is a great example of this. She lives up in Seattle, and she has these cocktail parties where she has 10 or so people, and she actually sits you in certain places, and then she introduces a theme for the night where she wants you to talk about those things, and she's introduce certain people to the table to have that discussion, right?
Totally. And so if you think about how to translate that into this phone, it's actually to say, you know, we don't want the questions to feel like people are being judged. We want them to be fun. We want them to be something that activates your imagination and gives you a little bit of personality. So we pair up with, basically think of it like Saturday Night Live hosts, where you don't have to be an actor, but you have to be someone that's an interesting mover and shaker in the world. And it can be in the worlds of arts and entertainment. It can be creative thinkers. It can be entrepreneurs. It can be leaders in their community. And we partner with them to say, we would love you to ask the questions of the day.
Okay.
And creative people create the best questions. So we've had, people offer.
Would a question be like, tell me about the last trip you took or something like that?
Yes, but sometimes even more interesting, like one of ours was, how would a 5-year-old describe your job? All the way to, how many cats is too many cats? Yeah. And then there's also value ones where it is something about how you see the world. So one question was recently was, if you couldn't fail, what would you try?
Yeah. And
the kind of responses in our community is amazing. Like the men on the community, the women, they're smart, they're intelligent, they're thoughtful, and they're actually people who are like, Tinder and Match didn't work for me. So so with that question, we had anything from world peace and stopping poverty to one guy who said, I'd rob a bank. And then the next sentence was, am I doing this right? Which was hilarious, right? Because he's like, if I can't fail, I'd rob a bank, right? And then sort of it was like the second pause and then looking around and going, yeah, right? And so that was amazing. So that's the kind of stuff we get.
Now, once you start answering some of these questions, how do you get introduced to people, or do they just see your answer, or how do people meet?
Right. How do people meet in real life? Well, so I think
in Tinder, I would swipe, I guess, right, and
right.
If you swiped right on me, we would get to interact.
Right.
How does
Siren work?
Meeting happen in
Yes.
Siren?
And remember, I don't think that's meeting, right? That's really just like
Judgment.
The original something, but it's not meeting. And so I think that's where a lot of these sites fail. So Siren has two things that we hope work in a much more humanizing kind of way. And one is that women, when they get on, their photos are by default blurred and not visible. And the idea is not because they're ashamed of who they look like or because they aren't proud of who they are. It's because we know, and unfortunately in 2015, that women, when they put their information out there, are stalked, they're harassed, they're judged. And when they're sort of when people are entitled, they'll actually say, well, you didn't respond the way that I wanted to, and so now they'll get really negative backlash from that. As well, if you're a professional woman and you see your client or a student or a customer, and I've had this actually happen when I tested Tinder, was that there would be somebody as a business relationship that would say, I saw your profile on Tinder. Yeah. And it just sort of is in the middle of the table, and I'm thinking, I don't know what the right answer is. right? You've now introduced something that was never supposed to be part of this conversation.
Yeah.
If I told you I swiped left, right, to reject you, now you're insulted about something that should have never been a thing.
Yeah.
If I told you I swiped right, then now something's in play that should have never been there.
Yeah.
And so you're like, and a lot of women I know, so like waitresses, for example, have said they absolutely can't use Tinder for that same reason, because suddenly their interaction with their customers, which should be respectful, now is being compromised.
Yeah.
So that's actually why we control the photo visibility, but it's also a way for guys to actually say, who's interested in me?
Yeah.
And who's interested in me because a little bit about my personality in addition to everything else that kind of makes chemistry intriguing. So a woman will be default not visible, and then what she'll do is she'll actually see, I don't know if you can see this, but you can see like one black and white photo, a couple other photos if you want, and then his responses to the question of the day. And then this V is actually for visible, where you're saying, I want to make myself visible to this guy. He can now get a notification that says, here is a woman who's made herself visible. You can look at her question of the day responses and then start messaging back and forth. But we don't give that much information, so we're like, we'll give you an age range. We'll give you the kind of stuff that in a cocktail party you would know about a person.
Yeah.
Approximate age, generally maybe what they do, what they're interested in a little bit,
Yeah.
and then everything else I'm like, you got to figure that out. Like, I'm not going to tell you about their pets, about whether they smoke, about all this other kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's easily stuff you can find on a first meeting,
Yeah. Can you just dig in a little bit and show me a little bit more through the app?
Sure. So this is the home page. This is the landing page, which is the question of the day. So the first part is, today's question is, what's your sign and how much do you think it reflects you? This is my answer here. And as a woman, if I'm signed in, here are all of the current answers of the questions of the day. So it does give a little bit of personal expression. So someone says, Scorpio, but whatever, I think astrology is kind of neat and interesting, but we all have control. So that's his perspective. You can also go to see other questions. So our questions are, I would have to say, kind of awesome. And you can answer these ones here. So for example, here's another question, which is, your playground, sandbox, blank and fort as an adult is this, and then you can actually see who answered those questions. Your host is the person who's asking the questions of the day. So let's go back to today's question. So today, it's actually a woman, she's creative in Seattle, and her name is Whitney, and so this is like the host. From here, we can go to, this is your profile, which is this tab, which is basically what you look like. And so also as a woman, you can actually see how you look to, so this button here says, here's how you see as non-visible, right? This is the blurred.
Got it.
So you can actually see how you actually look to the rest of, sort of the Siren community, and then you can message inside here. So yeah, that's the app.
Very cool.
So,
Is it a free service or do you pay? How do you get, what's your business model?
Man, is this going to be that kind of conversation?
What's your business model?
So for the investors out there. A lot of mobile obviously is going into this, like, get the community, grow it in a meaningful way, and then the monetizing will happen when there's a certain density and a quality network of people. So Siren is definitely free to use, and in fact, I think one of the interesting things that we're really navigating carefully is to say a lot of dating sites have failed because the way that they try to monetize is actually by cutting connections in a really horrible way, where they're like, oh, you want to see her picture? You have to pay $2.99.
Yeah.
Or you want to message her now? You have to pay $8.99.
Yeah.
And that's horrible because, for every dollar you get there, you're going to lose 10 people, including someone like me who would be kind of offended by that. So the way we actually think is an interesting way to monetize it is there's aggregate data, right? There's all this stuff about people saying these are the things that they're interested in.
Yep.
And by, not personalizing it or identifying one person, you can say, this is generally how this community is thinking, right? In kind of that social media space, which is really valuable data. I just heard that Nielsen's only uses 25,000 TV sets to know what people are interested in watching.
Yeah.
That's small, right? Especially for something like this. And the other one is that we know that our community are professionals and they're busy. So suddenly, if you had a cocktail party or a dinner that was 200 people, it would get too noisy, and you don't have meaningful connections. And so we're like,
the best ones are 8.
8? Good to know. You'll be invited to our next 8-person party then, Robert. So we want to say, how do we curate the experience for people so that it does feel like, when you get on, the kinds of people and the interests you have start to sort of naturally flow because of your lifestyles and your values. And so we'll create kind of like Siren sub-communities where maybe you just moved into town, or you're interested in, food and wine or something like that. And so you would, I'm inspired by the kind of businesses where you pay because it allows it to be easier, right? Or to be, of a more quality, or because it's faster, right? And so I think inspired by that, we can actually figure out, ways to monetize.
Very cool. Is there any social proof? Because we love having social proof in real life.
Right.
Sort of how I met you was my friend who I trust said I have to meet you. That was social proof, right?
Right.
Is there anything like that in Siren?
We do, definitely. So right now there's actually also one other, we have one thing right now that's in play, and we're going to roll out another one, probably in like 1 or 2 iterations from now. And so the first is that as a woman, you're always generally looking out for your other female friends, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, so you can forward a profile of a guy. So if it's somebody that you're like, you know what, not my kind of person, but I know someone who's totally into, then she can forward that profile. And if that other person's not on Siren, she gets an email. And if she is on Siren, then she has a notification that here's a forwarded new profile. But on a larger scale, thinking about this idea of a curated community, of this idea that it is a community and not just 2 isolated people that are, lepers and single and sad, is like, we're like, that's not how people meet in real life. Let's bring in the people who care about you. So we want to have this idea of a matchmaker, which, is a contemporary idea of a matchmaker. So your goal as a matchmaker might not be necessarily to get 2 people married, but to say, I care about this person, and I know this person well enough to know, here's an interesting person for you that you can just talk to, that will just start the conversation, agenda-free. And so, if you're married, if you're a long-term relationship, if you're just a friend on a site, you can get on as a matchmaker and then say, hey, this person seems really interesting. I'm going to message this person for a little while, check it out, right? And then say, hey, I would like you to meet so-and-so. And I think this is also a really great way for the lesbian and gay community to actually start to be folded into the Siren community, because right now, this is a heteronormative model, right? So we're talking about men and women and trying to redress that gender issue. But the idea of inclusivity and of thinking about how you make those meaningful connections, well, it's human to human, and so we want to be able to do that.
Yeah. How are you funded so far?
Blood, sweat, and tears.
So bootstrapped.
We were bootstrapped for a little while, which as an artist is an interesting but very common space to be in. So I think of money as being energy, and so as an artist, I always thought whether you have $200 or $200,000, the idea is that you maximize that experience through that kind of energy that you put in. And so bootstrapping totally got it, right? That started out the vision and made it clear. We had a friends and family round that got us for the next year through, and now we're actually fundraising for like an angel round. And the idea is actually to say, because there are very few female founded companies, I'm definitely finding that that's a weird thing, but it's a thing for sure.
Yeah.
But also to say, anyone who thinks of dating as being, oh, it's calcified, it's, Match and Tinder have already figured it all out and that's all there is to it, they're not going to be our peoples, right? They're not going to get that there's actually a really...
Google was the 17th search engine.
I'm just going to use that, actually. Right.
And everybody thought it was done, right?
Right.
Alta Vista had it locked up.
Oh my gosh.
If you go back to 1998, everybody thought, oh, Alta Vista has this search thing finished.
Oh.
So.
Robert, you could be our like Siren spokesman going like, no, seriously, things can be done better.
Yeah.
But actually, that skepticism is that love. Like, I love that kind of rising underdog feeling where you're like, yeah, you think this has all been done, but there's always a better way to do it. And actually, Google's a perfect example, right? It was actually like, that's not what I wanted to look for in Alta Vista, right? But Google suddenly brought in what I, as a human being, wanted to see to the screen. And that's what we're doing too.
So where do we find it?
So it's now in the iTunes store. Android will be in the Google Play Store in mid-July. And you can find us under Siren Socially Evolved. And for the San Francisco, Bay Area, and Seattle communities, you can use the invite code GOLDEN, GOLDEN, all lowercase, to jump on. So we welcome people on Siren.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks.